Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. My name is Danielle, and I'm with the HRCA. We have another great lineup for you tonight with Dave from Davidsons here to teach you about some great wine that he picked out for the holidays that are coming up. I can't believe it's already November, let alone the middle of November, but here we are. So thank you so much for being with us. I greatly appreciate you guys being here. If you guys want to turn on your screens, your cameras, if you feel comfortable doing that, please do so. It's a lot easier to talk to faces than it is to talk to a black screen. So if you feel comfortable doing that, we'd appreciate it. If not, don't worry about it. And we have a little bit of a smaller crowd tonight, but I think we should still probably all stay muted and ask the questions you might have through the chat instead of unmuting yourselves. So let's just try to stick with that if possible. And with that, we will pass it over to Davidson's wine specialist, Dave Bauer, and he will get us kicked off and started.
Hey folks, let's get this PowerPoint up here. So Danielle, thanks. Happy to be here, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I am going to just do a quick little thing on my end. Alrighty. So tonight's agenda. What are we here for? We're going to drink some wine.
Going over the internet.
So first and foremost, that's what we're doing. Danielle, I think we have other people who are. Have you muted? Okay, cool. All right. So anyhow, we'll drink some wine. We'll drink some more wine, and then I'm going to talk about wine and food pairings for holiday meals and talk about it from the perspective of why things work and therefore why some things don't work. We'll talk about the people, the places, some of the winemaking techniques behind the wines we're sampling. Even though we're not drinking any bubbles today, I will say a few words about bubbles for the holidays because I know a lot of people want to have a few basics going into the December holidays. And we're going to spend some time talking about wines with desserts. And our last wine today is a lovely dessert wine that I think you'll find to be a real treat and a great thing for holiday meals. So we'll finish up with Q&A. As Danielle said, if you have questions, pop them into the chat. My wife, Jane, who is sitting just off camera here with me, is sitting here monitoring the chat. And if there's something pressing, she will bring it to my attention. And Danielle and Rebecca, if you need to reach me for anything, please just DM Jane as well. And with that, let's get to it. Tonight's wines, we have 4. We're going to start with the rosé, Mr. Pink from the Underground Wine Company. Then we're going to move onto the white, the Gewürztraminer, and we'll talk about why that order is chosen when we get there. Then we'll move into the red from Domaine Rouet in Beaujolais, and finally we'll end up with that Pedro Jimenez sherry. So I always hate being on these kinds of meetings where people talk and talk and talk, and you're really here to drink, right? So I know I am. So let's just get into Mr. Pink. We'll talk about that just as the wine, and then we'll talk about a few other things while we're enjoying that. So Mr. Pink is a delightful rosé that's a blend of Syrah and Sangiovese from the Columbia Valley of Washington State. It comes from a relatively small winemaking project called the Underground Wine Project. It's a collaboration between 2 winemakers that you can see there. If any of you follow our year-end favorite wine list that Davidsons has put out for I don't know how many years going back, last year I had a wine called Devil's Playground, a wonderful Washington State Cabernet that is made by this same winery. And we've currently brought in a wine from the site of Hand Cellars, a red blend that we've got. I think these guys just make terrific wines, And they do them in relatively small production, 15,000 cases here. So this is not one of those mass-produced things like Whispering Angel from France, where, believe it or not, they make 500,000 cases of that a year. Fairly limited production here, and lovingly made by some great winemakers. So when you have this, go ahead and take a sip. You will notice it's lovely pale salmon color. I get lovely flavors of strawberry, raspberry, maybe a little bit of stone fruit here, but it's dry, it's crisp, it's got enough acidity that it makes for a great pairing for Thanksgiving or a holiday meal. The nice thing about wines that have a good crisp acidity like this is their cleansing. That acidity will cut through the fat that you might have in your meal. You know, if you've got a gravy that's got a lot of fat or something, this really helps to serve to cleanse your palate, refresh your taste buds, and let you move on to the next things on the meal. So a crisp wine like this with good acidity, be it a rosé or be it a crisp white, works great for those reasons. So enjoy that, and while we're drinking this wine, I'm going to knock out a couple other subjects that I think are important for holiday meals. So we're going to take a little bit of a detour while we're enjoying this lovely rosé. There's many things I could have talked about today, but in trying to keep it to 4 wines, I can't pick all the wines that might go with different kinds of holiday meals, obviously. So let's knock out these while we're enjoying the rosé. Let's say you're having prime rib or beef or buffalo, or maybe you're roasting a leg of lamb or grilling a rack of lamb on the grill. What are the wines you should have with that? Anybody got some ideas? Just pop them into the chat, and we'll see what people say. Make this a little. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, my scribe over here is saying nobody's doing the chat. Hello, are you home? Cabernet. I got a Cabernet. Anything else? Anybody? Pinot Noirs can work. So big reds, exactly. Big full-bodied reds. At least that's my preference. I do know that, you know, the person who said Pinot Noir, I do know that a prime rib with Pinot is a combination that a lot of people love. And rule number 1 of wine enjoyment is drink what you like. So if you're one of those prime rib and Pinot people, by all means, go for it. For me, I prefer bigger reds with these. So you could do Merlot. Here I have 3 different Merlots that we carry at the store. It can hit 3 different price points. If it's your big holiday meal, something like Pedestal Merlot here, which comes from Long Shadows in Washington State, a winery that brings in guest winemakers from all around the world. And this particular wine is made by Michel Rolland, a very famous French winemaker, known for making beautiful wines in Bordeaux, France. Rutherford Hill has a nice $25-ish Merlot that would go great with any of those meals. And then, of course, you know, you're going to make more than you're going to eat. And when it's left overnight, something like the Velvet Devil Merlot, another Washington Merlot, runs $10 or $11, perfect for when you're reheating those leftovers and still want a nice wine to go with them. Backsburg, yeah, that works too. Backsburg, a nice kosher winery in South Africa would be a nice choice. In Cabernet, just the couple I've chosen to feature here, if it's a holiday meal, or better yet, if you've got that hard to please person on your Christmas or holiday gift giving list, Spotswood Cabernet, one of the most highly regarded wineries in Napa Valley, California. This guy runs a little over $200 a bottle. You could add that to your cellar and enjoy it 10 years from now. Or if you're opening a big collector kind of wine like this, and you're drinking a younger vintage, remember to open it, decant it, let it breathe. It will only get better. Austin Hope in Paso Robles, California, around $50, one of our best-selling higher tiered Cabernets, big, jammy, ripe, perfect for those. And then left overnight, I'm really fond of this. We just released this year's top wines of the year list. This particular little Cabernet Sauvignon from Mendoza, Argentina is on it. Runs $12.99. Really surprisingly good for the money. Great leftover wine when you're reheating the leftover prime rib. Bordeaux, kind of the same story. We do have you can do top-end collectible Bordeaux's. I do have a few bottles left from the great 2000 vintage of this. This is the bottle for the person who has everything on your gift list. They run about 560 bucks. Chateau Menet, a nice Cabernet Sauvignon based Merlot. These run about 25 bucks. Your leftover wine, a little $11 bottle from the people from Chateau Béchevel. Make a little $11 Merlot-based wine. That is a fun little wine to go with your leftovers. So, but those are my kinds of choices for big red meats, because the tannins that these have, especially at the upper tier wines, the big, dark, rich fruits, I think just go beautifully with any of those red meat dishes. So those are the kinds of recommendations I do for those. All right, I know that not everybody has all four wines, so what you're going to see me doing tonight is kind of opening the wines as we go, a little bit on the early side. That way, everybody who is, if you haven't taken all four, you have something in your glass while we're talking. So let's move on to the. Oh, let's not move on that fast. What did I just do there? Hang on just a moment, folks. Dave has screwed up. All right, do we have that? So let me put that in presentation mode. All right, sorry about that. Go back. All right, so the second wine is Gewürztraminer. And you might ask, why did I choose to serve the white wine after the rosé, when kind of the classic order would be the whites, then the rosés, then the reds? And the reason for that, he has something to drink here. The reason for that is that this Gewürztraminer, as you see if you have it, it's in a bottle that is blue. And in Germany, when you see a wine in a blue bottle, historically what they're telling you is that that wine is not dry, that it has some sweetness to it. And the folks from Olathe Winery, which is in Olathe, near home of delicious sweet corn, and near Delta in western Colorado, have adopted that same convention for this wine. And if you smell it and taste it, it has that beautiful spicy nose that Gewürztraminer is known for. And in the flavor, it's certainly not excessively sweet by any stretch, but it clocks in at about 1.5% residual sugar. And if you were to taste this and then go back to that rosé, you would notice how dry the rosé is. The rosé clocks in at only 1/3% sugar, basically below the threshold that most people can taste. So, as we talk about pairings in the next slide, what I really like about this is the fact that that sweetness really helps you with a holiday meal, especially if you have certain dishes on the plate that aren't going to be dry. And we'll talk about that first. But let's talk for a moment about this winery. Cottonwood Cellars is they're a little bit under the radar. You don't see them in a lot of stores, and that's because up until just recently, they were one of the wineries that, while they were available at retail, they self-distributed. It was basically a one-woman operation running this show. And she finally has, at least here on the Front Range, signed up with a wholesaler to service her accounts. And so you might see their wines a little bit more regularly available, both at Davidsons and at some of the other stores that we hope you don't shop at. But they have been doing this since 1994. And they under their premium wines are bottled under the Cottonwood Cellars label. Their less expensive wines are bottled under this Olathe Winery label. It is the same winery. It's just that they put out some real wonderful values under this Olathe brand. And if you bought this, you saw that we were selling this for $9.99 a bottle. And it's a lovely Gewürztraminer for that. Gewürztraminer always has that little spicy note to it. And as they describe it here on their slide, you get flavors of apple, pear, but it's really that spice that Gewürztraminer is known for, which makes it a very food-friendly wine. We have Gewürztraminers from Washington State. Early next week, I'm getting in a few German ones that are coming in, but it's a great wine to go with your holiday dinners. So let's talk about Dave's general rules of thumb for holiday wine pairings. Number one, it's not about the turkey. It's that time of year where already 5 or 6 times today I've had people come in and say, "What wine goes with turkey?" Turkey doesn't care. Turkey is really versatile. It goes with whites, it goes with reds, it goes with dry wines, it goes with sweet wines, it goes with lighter bodied wines, it goes with heavier bodied wines. Turkey is one of the easiest foods to pair with. But, and there's a but we'll be getting to. Let's say you've got a ham on the plate, you're doing, turkey and you're doing ham, or maybe you're just doing ham. Well, it's mostly not about the ham either, because ham, with one very notable exception, is pretty easy to pair with as well. What it is about is everything else that you're serving for dinner. And so what I always tell our customers to do is forget about the turkey. Just tell me what else you're making for dinner, and then I can help you pick a nice wine to go with your holiday dinner. And if you're doing just a really simple turkey, green beans, mashed potatoes, then no problem, because all of those things go with a lot of wines. And you can serve, pretty much whatever your heart desires with them, be it a Riesling, a Gewürztraminer, or some lighter bodied reds. But there are some pitfalls. If your ham is really salty, last night Jane and I made a ham that she picked up on sale at the grocery store, and it was delicious, but it was super salty. And the thing you have to watch out for with salty foods, especially super salty things like a ham, is that salt magnifies the tannins in the wine. So if you've got one of those nice Cabernets or Merlots that we were showing before, and you want to do that for your ham dinner, what you will find is that salt really magnifies those tannins to the point of unpleasantness. Tannin, I presume you all know, I always describe that as if you've ever had a cup of oversteeped Lipton tea and you get that furry sensation on the back of your teeth. That's a great way to detect tannins. But salty foods really magnify that. They also tend to magnify the astringency that you have in wines. And so when you're doing something like a salty ham, you want a lighter bodied red. Pinot Noir is perfect. Gamay, which is our third wine, is perfect. Zinfandel, a nice fruity Zinfandel goes nicely with a ham. But stay away from those Cabs and Merlots when you're doing it. Fatty gravy. The fat tends to really just linger in your mouth. We talked about that a little bit with the rosé, and that cleansing acidity of the rosé cuts through the fat and really refreshes your palate. So if you're going to have fattier foods on the menu, maybe that gravy is made with all of those drippings from the turkey, or maybe your mashed potatoes, or just you're the kind of person who loves to load those up with butter and sour cream and stuff when you're making them. The fattier the foods, the more you want a wine that has a nice crisp acidity to help cut through that and refresh your palate. The one that I always ask about with people is, what's sweet on the meal? If you're the kind of person who likes to serve sweet potatoes or yams, and you're making that dish with melting some brown sugar over the top of it, and then melting some marshmallows over the top of that, you've got a pretty sweet side dish there. And so when you have that sweetness from either the sweet potatoes or from grandma's cranberry jello salad, which is pretty much a crash and burn with any wine, eat that, have a glass of water, and then move back to the meal. But when when you've got that those sweet side dishes, then you want something like this Gewürztraminer or a sweeter Riesling that will stand up to the sweetness of those dishes, because you usually want to have a wine that is at least as sweet as your meal. So off-dry whites like the Gewürztraminer are a great choice for holiday meals. Kind of the classic pairing is Riesling, and you can have Riesling that comes from the United States, from Washington, from Oregon, from California, from New York State. There's great Rieslings coming from the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. And yes, Riesling grows really well here in Colorado. Support your local producers. There's some wonderful Colorado Rieslings as well. But ask your salesperson, because you want to make sure you're getting one of the sweetness level you want. Especially in California, in Oregon, you're starting to see more and more bone dry Rieslings. And while they're delicious, they may not be the best match for your holiday meal. German Rieslings can come in all sorts of styles, from completely bone dry. You'll see the word Trocken, Trocken, which means dry in German. Those are bone dry, and again, beware those if you've got anything sweet on the plate. All the way up to unctuously sweet and crazy expensive dessert level Rieslings. But if you get one that says Cabinet on the label, that is kind of in that off-dry style, and I think makes a really great match to most holiday meals, and will stand up to that sweet potato dish that we were talking about as well. So that makes a great choice. You can get Rieslings from the Alsace region of France, but again, ask your salesperson to help you find one that isn't bone dry, because some of them are. You could do Chenin Blanc. And if Vouvray from France is Chenin Blanc. Chenin Blanc also grows really well in South Africa. Don't overlook the South African ones, they're great. But if you're doing a Vouvray, seek out one that says demi-sec on the label. Demi-sec in French means half dry, therefore half sweet, therefore right about the sweetness level that we're talking about for these wines. You'll see some that say sec, which means dry. You'll occasionally see some that say Mollieux, M-O-L-L-I-E-U-X, which is sweeter still, fine if that's what you like, but that might be a little sweet for your dinner if that's not what you're after. There's plenty of off-dry white blends. Camus Conundrum, Evolution, wines like that would be fine choices for your holiday meal. But again, your salesperson can guide you through ones that will work and ones that won't work with the foods you're having. So that's it for whites. I'm about ready to move on to the reds. Let me pause. If there's any questions in the chat or anything, let me know. Or if you have any, now's a good time to ask them. All right. So if you have the third wine, Domaine Rouet, now is a fine time to pour that. I'm going to do that for Jane and me here. Domaine Rouet is a small mom and pop kind of producer in the southern end of the Beaujolais region of France. Beaujolais is technically part of Burgundy, France, but it's a very south end, and most people think about it differently than the rest of Burgundy, because in the rest of Burgundy, the grapes that you see almost exclusively are Chardonnay in whites, Chablis, and all the different place names you see. Those are all Chardonnays, with one exception that we'll save for another time. And Pinot Noir is the red that you see in most of northern and central Burgundy. But once you cross from the Macon and go further south into the Beaujolais region, then the light bulb goes off, and there's almost no Pinot Noir grown and almost all Gamay grown. So what we have here is the Gamay grape, which is what you see in your Beaujolais wines. And if you smell this, I get a lot of blueberry, blackberry. That fruit nose that I'm getting here is just classic Beaujolais. You can get less expensive, lower priced Beaujolais. But what we have here is what's known as a cru Beaujolais, one of the top producing regions for Beaujolais in the area. And I'll explain that a little bit more. But first, let me tell you a little bit about this producer. As I said, this is a small producer. Oh, okay. I'm going to come back to this and just skip over to this slide. Talk about this producer first. There we go. All right, we're there. We're sorry. Okay, so this is the people who actually made the wine we're drinking, Domaine Rouet. This is their facility. Jane and I had the good fortune of visiting France September of last year, and we did stop in and see these nice people. So this is their winery in Cercier, which is in the region known as Brouilly. Every time we visit wineries, if the winery dog is there, I try to take a picture of the pooch. So here's Domaine Rouet's official greeter. And this is Katie Dutel. Katie and her husband David are the owners of this winery. And you can see that they've converted their old caves into their offices and tasting rooms. It's a lovely, lovely facility that they're using for this, and this is dug out into the hillsides, as you see there. This is their winery. It's fairly small, and when you are space limited like this, I think this is a fine example of what you do when you don't have a lot of physical capacity. Instead of these big round tanks that you see at most, round stainless steel tanks that you see at most wineries, the Dutels have chosen instead to use these rectangular tanks so they can make maximum use of the available square footage that they have. And they're a little bit harder to clean, but other than that, they're able to make that much more wine in the very limited space they have. And just like the traditional round tanks, they're temperature controlled. They've got jackets that can control the heat of the fermentations and so forth. So I think it's a real interesting thing that they've done to be able to bump up their capacity at least a little bit in the small winery that they have. So what's going on here? This is their crusher destemmer. And we were there at harvest, where they had just brought in the 2019 harvest, and we are drinking a 2018 today. At least that's what my bottle is, and I think probably the same bottles you have. But this was the 2019 harvest, where they had just crushed it, and they're pumping it into their tanks to ferment. So here's Katie and David. This way over on the side is that same crusher destemmer. They've now moved it outside, and this is what's left after they crush the grapes. These are the skins, the stems, the seeds, and their worker is loading that into the forklift, where they are going to take it and dump it out. I believe they actually just put this out on their fields and let it compost into a natural fertilizer that they reuse. The Dutels do farm organically. They don't make claims to that on their labels, mostly because getting organic certification costs money, and it's money they'd rather spend in making their wines be affordable for you. So really, really wonderful people, and really, really wonderful wines. Let me back up here to the slide I skipped. So Beaujolais styles. First of all, today, happy Beaujolais Nouveau Day. Today is the third Thursday in November. And the third Thursday of November is the day that worldwide Beaujolais Nouveau is released. So this morning, the first thing I did when I showed up for work was get the Beaujolais Nouveau that came in yesterday from our wholesaler, put it out on the sales floor and make it available to people. And within the first hour or so, we'd already sold a case of it to people who are drinking Beaujolais Nouveau tonight. So what is Beaujolais Nouveau? It is the first wine of the current new vintage. So the 2020 vintage of Beaujolais Nouveau is what you see in the store. And this whole concept was created by Georges Duboeuf in the 1950s as a marketing gimmick to just race wines as fast as they could make them into the markets of Paris.
I'm gonna have to come back and see if we can watch it later because I want to see what the UCLA thing's about.
I'm hearing some other people talk, so if you could mute, please. I'm hearing, so anyhow, it was a marketing gimmick to get people to do that, and wineries were doing this earlier and earlier and earlier, and finally in the 1970s, they all got together and said, okay, stop the nonsense, we're still all going to make it, and it's going to be a big thing, but we're all going to release our Beaujolais Nouveau on the third Thursday in November. I can't help but think that that day wasn't probably chosen in part because of American Thanksgiving, because Beaujolais Nouveau is often a wine that people like to serve at Thanksgiving. Compared to the Beaujolais that we're drinking here, Beaujolais Nouveau is just going to be unctuously fruity. It's not going to have the body and tannins that this wine has, because it was a plant 3 months ago. And the whole concept behind it is just young, fruity wines that are designed to be drunk really, really young. And ideally, if you've got Beaujolais Nouveau, you buy it, you want to consume it by Valentine's Day. That's kind of what it's all about. And as Jane points out, not wrongly, it's also a great way for wineries to generate cash flow. It's a real cash cow for them because they're not holding inventory for very long. The second thing I'm going to mention just briefly is Paradis. Paradis stands for paradise, that's the translation in French, is something that I'm going to tell you about, but you can't have it. Paradis is like uber nouveau Beaujolais Nouveau. And it was a thing we didn't even know existed until we happened to visit at Harvest last year. Basically, it is the just crushed, still fermenting gamay juice slightly turned into wine that maybe clocks in at 3 or 4% alcohol. It's bubbly, it's still fermenting, it's still doing its thing, but it gives you the flavor of the grapes. And in Beaujolais, it's never bottled. People go to the wineries and bring their jugs in hand and ask the winery to fill it and give them Paradis. And they take it home, and you basically have it for lunch. You have it for dinner that night. It doesn't keep, but it is a fascinating thing. And if you ever find yourself visiting Beaujolais during harvest, seek it out. It's one of those experiences you will only get there. So after we move away from the Nouveau, on the bottom shelf of every wine store, including ours, you will see wines just labeled Beaujolais or Beaujolais Village. Beaujolais is a fairly large region, and at the southern end are the grapes that are the least desirable. Not that they're bad, but they're just not of the quality of the ones that grow further north in Beaujolais. And so those wines just get labeled as Beaujolais. You can often find them for $10 a bottle on the shelf, and they're perfectly fine as a nice fruity quaff. Beaujolais Village, the further north region, slightly better fruit, usually $1 or $2 more a bottle, but coming from the smaller, more select, generally better vineyards. And then lastly, there's Cru Beaujolais, which are 10 villages known for superior quality that get to use their name on the label. So, get this where we can see it here. All I see is glare. But on your bottle, you see Renier. Renier is one of those 10 crus. Saint-Amour, Julianus, Chenin, Mouvant, Fleury, Chirouble, Morgon, Renier, Brouilly, and Côte de Brouilly. So those are the 10 best villages, and wines that are made exclusively from grapes from those little villages, and they are little villages, get to keep their place name on the label. So, compared to your typical Beaujolais or Beaujolais Village, when you have this wine, you do get a little bit more tannic sensation. You can sense that these grapes have better quality. They were resting on their skins, and they've pulled some of the skin tannins out of them. The some of these can be done in oak as well, although the one we're having here has been aged exclusively in stainless steel. So the tannin that you get comes from the skins, but it is possible to see oak-aged Beaujolais, and then you will have even more tannins because they're pulling the tannins both from the wood and from the skins. Now remember what we said earlier about tannins kind of getting amplified, especially if you're having salty food and stuff. So I purposely picked this one because I think it's got some structure, but the tannins aren't really dominant. If you were to have a wine from Côte de Brouilly or a wine from Bourgogne, those tend to be even fuller bodied, and while they might be a great pairing for some red meat, and they would still certainly go well with your turkey, I wouldn't necessarily serve those two regions with my ham. Questions on any of the Beaujolais? What do you think about this wine? Do you like it? Put some comments in the text in the chat for us, and let us see your thoughts. All right, so what about bubbles? I did not pouring any bubbles, but I want to just answer a couple questions that typically come up fairly quickly here. Number one, champagne is not a thing, it's a place. So if you want real champagne, it comes from Champagne. It comes only from Champagne. The way I explain this to people is this way. Imagine going into your local liquor store, hopefully Davidsons, and you happen to be browsing the little $10 French wines from the south of France, and you pick up a bottle of red wine, and you say, "Huh, what's this? It says Napa Valley Red, but it's from France." You'd be upset, and that's basically why the French are upset that we as Americans still label some of our champagne, air quotes, made in California, as champagne, or our blend of who knows what labeled as Burgundy, because it's almost certainly not all Pinot Noir. And the reason for that is prior to 1996, it was illegal in the United States to use foreign place names. If I were starting a winery today, I could no longer do that. But if I'm a big brand that's been around forever, like Corbel, or like, I can't think of it now, one of the stuff that comes in the 5-liter jugs, and hopefully you don't drink that, Carlo Rossi. Those brands have been around forever, and they're grandfathered. If they are still allowed to do that, although now we finally have to say California champagne if they do. But if you want real champagne, get real champagne. And you want to pay attention to sweetness levels for all the reasons we've been talking about. If you see a bottle labeled Brut Zero, Brut Nature, or No Dosage, these wines are bone dry, less than 1/3% residual sugar, and they're great by themselves, but expect them to be dry. There's a question. Okay, so Gruet has both a I don't think they have an extra brut, which is the next level of sweetness, which is about 0.5% residual sugar, typically still below what most people can taste. Studies have shown that most people start perceiving the sweetness of a wine when it is somewhere around 8 to 12 grams per liter, or roughly 0.8% to 1.2% residual sugar. I've tested myself a number of times, and I've done this a long time, that I know I can taste it beginning at about 0.7, but I think that's a bit of an acquired skill. And as I say, most people at a Brut Zero or an extra Brut would perceive the wine as completely dry. Brut, which is the most popular label you find on sparkling wines, is just ever so slightly sweet. Hangs out around 1% residual sugar, can be anywhere from 0.6% to about 1.2, but that's what you see most often on a sparkling wine label, and it is kind of the classic thing for most bubbles. Extra dry, somewhat counterintuitively, is sweeter than Brut, and this confuses customers all the time over the holidays. So that's about 1.2% to 1.7% sugar, and it definitely is a wine that you will detect some sweetness in, when you drink it. Then, even more counterintuitively, you will sometimes, especially on Prosecco, see wines that say dry. They're decidedly not dry. They could be as high as 3% residual sugar. Just sort of the weird thing about the way sparkling wines are labeled is that dry isn't. And then lastly, you'll sometimes, especially on some champagnes or some domestic wines, including the person who I mentioned, Gruet, they make one that's labeled demi-sec. These are, again, half dry, semi-dry, 3 to 5% residual sugar in those wines. If you want a sweeter wine with your meal, grab something that's labeled demi-sec, and that will, if you want bubbles, that'll serve you well. Lastly, you occasionally see some that say doux or sweet, which are very sweet. And other than Asti from Italy, you rarely see anything with that amount of sweetness in it. So if you're doing bubbles for the holidays, if it's just you and your wife, or you and your husband, you might normally have gone out to a big New Year's Eve gala, but not this year. You're not going to buy the big cocktail dress. You're not going to get the tuxedo out, but you still want something great. Then these top tête de cuvée sparkling wines, celebrate at home with something like this. Everybody has heard of and knows of Dom Perignon. La Grande Dame is Veuve Clicquot's equivalent of that. What are these? These are what are known as late disgorged vintage champagnes, meaning that they came from a particular vintage year, 2010, 2008, in the case of these two that are well known. And the wine rested on its lees, on the yeast that ferments it, for a period of time that's between then and about a year ago, when these were then finished, bottled, put in their fancy boxes, and sent to you to sell for $160 or $175 a piece. But you don't necessarily have to spend that kind of money to get a late disgorged vintage champagne. This particular wine, our son got married this summer. This is the wine I served at his wedding. It's a late disgorged vintage champagne from the 2008 vintage from Premier Cru Vineyards in Champagne. It's the vineyards, not the producer, that are rated for quality. A wonderful, wonderful wine that you can buy for $70. It doesn't come in a fancy box, but you can decide if that box is worth $90 or $100 to you. Lanson, another producer that does a late disgorged champagne that, much like what we just described there, runs about $90. But any of these, if you're quarantining at home, you still want a lovely New Year's Eve, grab one of these. None of them will disappoint. If you want something a little bit down market, we always try to recommend grower champagnes that are made by people who grow the grapes and make the wines from them. The big brands, Veuve Clicquot, Moet et Chandon, Piper Heidsieck, those are what are called negociants. They buy grapes every year from many small producers, blend those grapes to their house style. Nothing wrong with that, but as a wine specialist, I always like to support the little guys. And these are 4 examples of people that are making lovely champagnes from grapes that they grew themselves. And each one of these is under $50 a bottle. A lovely wine that you could serve if you're getting together with close nearby family members or the like. Now, let's say you've got your just turned legal drinking age offspring that are with you. It's New Year's Eve. This is not the night to educate them about grower champagnes or about late disgorged champagnes that you're going to have to yourself. So, get them a bottle of Prosecco, get them a bottle of Corbel California champagne, excuse me, or get them a bottle of Cava from Spain, which is fermented in its bottle the way real champagne is made, but you can buy this bottle for $7. If you do want something from France, there are wines from the south of France that, while not champagne, they're French. They might think they're champagne, that you can buy for $9 or $10 for the kids. And if you want to take a little vacation because we can't go anywhere, you can get fun stuff like a sparkling wine from Brazil. Yeah, we got stuff like that. Or if they have a sweet tooth, I mentioned Asti before. This is a sweet style of sparkling wine from northwestern Italy. If people have a sweet tooth, this is the wine for them. Every bottle I'm showing here is $15 or less, and we'll keep people happy. All right, let's pop into the last wine, if you haven't already done so. Dios Baco Pedro Jimenez Sherry. I had a couple of people who were talking to me when they were buying the wines from the Zoom, and they buy 3, but they didn't buy this one. It's like, oh, I don't do sherry. Well, you're missing something, folks. The sherry comes in all sorts of styles, and that's maybe something we can do a Zoom on next year or something to talk about sherries and their different styles. But this is dessert sherry, and if you pour it, you will see that it is the color kind of motor oil. It is brown. And this is a wine, I love this stuff, that gives you nose of raisins, figs, brown sugar. And as such, notice that I'm using just a tiny little glass here because what I've got here is maybe 1.5 ounces in my glass, perfect for a dessert pour. And something like this, I think, is perfect if you're having an apple pie for dinner, for dessert, pecan pie. This will work if you're doing a flan. I love to serve this with tiramisu because it just goes great with those kinds of things. And it's got such a texture in the mouth. It's rich, it's thick, it's almost syrupy. And it is just a delicious dessert companion. And my wife, who works in the cheese industry, says, yeah, and it goes well with a lot of cheeses as well, too. Now, the thing about this is a wine that is actually oxidized. You don't notice it. It doesn't taste sour or anything. But because it is already oxidized in the process they make it, this will keep a fairly long time. You notice that it comes with a bar top cork, the kind that just goes right back in, and the top is on the bottle. You can take this, if you open a bottle of this tonight, this will keep. You can, I wouldn't leave it in the sun, keep it in a cool, dry place, preferably one without light. But this bottle, you can now, you've busted into it, but it'll be perfectly good for Thanksgiving. It will probably be perfectly good at Christmas time. We opened a bottle of this particular wine this summer in August for a party, just with a couple close family friends. And I kind of forgot about it. It went to the corner of my bar, and I forgot it was there. And 6 weeks later, I found it. I opened it. Tasted just the same. Delicious stuff. So, wines with dessert. You can have different types of red dessert wines, like ports, which come both tawny and ruby. Tawny ports a little bit nuttier. Ruby look like red wine, a little bit fruitier, but they both go great. Late harvest red wines. Somebody asked if you could put this wine in the fridge. You certainly can, but there's no need to. It's not going to go bad. It's already oxidized. I mean, it will after a few weeks start losing a little bit of its flavor. But no, I mean, as I say, keep it in a, if you've got a basement, stick it in the corner of the basement. It'll be fine. If you do refrigerate it, then pull it out a couple hours before your meal so it's not refrigerator cold. Won't hurt it in the fridge, but it's not necessary. You can have late harvest red wines, basically grapes that have been left on the vine for a really long time. We have a late harvest Zinfandel that's great. You can have white dessert wines, Sauterne from France, made from grapes that are infested by botrytis, which is a rot. It looks ugly, but what it does is it makes the grapes get a very delicious honeyed character, and that's what makes Sauterne Sauterne. There are late harvest Rieslings from Germany, Austria, and other places as well that are great with light desserts. Ice wine are grapes that are left out on the vines until November and are then harvested late overnight when it's freezing, and they bring these frozen berries into the winery and press them and make a delicious dessert wine. So all of these are lovely dessert wines. I have two rules of thumb I want to leave you with. Number one, pay attention to sweetness levels. You want, as I've said a couple times, you want a wine that is at least as sweet than the dessert you're serving. Because if it is less sweet than the dessert, the rich sweetness of the dessert will make it taste sour. So something like this, which is crazy sweet, will stand up to your pies just fine. The other rule of thumb is you want to choose complementary flavors. So if you're having a big, rich, red port, a ruby port or a vintage port, and you're going to try to serve that with a little apple tart or something, or maybe with a flan, it's going to run it over. Meanwhile, a sweet white, like a Sauterne, is going to get lost in the big, rich chocolate of a flourless chocolate torte or a German chocolate cake or something like that. So choose your flavors complementary. If you're doing any chocolate, choose one of the red things, and you'll have a delicious dessert pairing. The wine that we're serving is made in a Solera system. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because I know it's getting a little bit late, but basically what they do with this is you often see Soleras depicted as a triangle, an upside down triangle sometimes, where what they do is they never ever empty a barrel. They, in this example, they say they at most take 40% out of a barrel. So the stuff that goes into the bottle comes out of those oldest barrels that they've had. And then after they take that 10, 20, 30, 40% out, they top it off with wines that they take off from the next oldest barrels. And then they top those barrels off with wine that's been aging from the ones that were added a little bit more recently, and so on and so forth, until the youngest wine that they just made this vintage is used to top off these. And so the idea is that any bottle that you get that comes from here, in theory, might still have a couple drops at least of wines that were from when the Solera was started. This particular wine, that 1970 on it, indicates that this Solera was started 50 years ago. So that's part of the reason why a wine like this can have that dark, rich color, because there might be a drop or two in this bottle that has literally aged for 50 years. When you see pictures of Soleras, they're always made to look like a really lovely mathematical thing like this. I haven't actually visited any Solera producers in Spain, but since we're doing this, we did visit one. There are wines like this made in Australia as well. And about 3 years ago, Jane and I got to go visit a producer of that called Chambers in Rutherglen in Victoria, Australia. I told you I always take a picture of the winery dog. There's theirs. And this is kind of how it really works. They're not small barrels. These are, barrels that you need a big extension ladder to get to that they use. And what you have here is Stephen Chambers, the winemaker for the winery in Australia, who's using a wine thief to just pull some samples of the wines of the different stages in their Solera that he was pulling for us to try. One of the few perks you get working in the wine business is you get people like Stephen who do that for you because he wants you to promote his products. So even though I don't have any of his wines, if you ever find them, his wines are great. You should try them. That being said, I have gone a couple minutes over. Thank you for hanging with me. If there's any questions, shout them out. And Danielle, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dave. We really appreciate your time tonight. And thanks for all of the great suggestions of wines. I hope that everybody found a wine either that they tried tonight or that he showed on some of his screens that you'll be able to pick up for Thanksgiving and other upcoming holidays. So hope that you guys enjoyed tonight, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks for some beer for for the winter season with Breckenridge Brewery. So feel free to grab a ticket to that and join us for that as well. And thanks again, Dave. Have a great rest of your guys' night.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us, everybody.